election for it not to be about a horse race, but for it to be about a discussion on the issues facing Santa Fe. And all of you in this room know that collectively, if we work together, we'll be able to develop the policies, create the movements, and move Santa Fe forward so we can protect our water for future generations, breathe clean air, make sure that as we grow in Santa Fe that we're not always having to put cars on the roadways, that we think about bike paths rather than roadways, that we think about walkways rather than always putting pavement in. And so this conversation tonight is about bringing forward incredible New Mexicans who every day think about this, who every day use their experience and their expertise to either lobby for legislation, become activists in communities, or author incredible books for the world that define what we need to do as citizens of this world to make it a better place for all of us. So tonight's about that. And there's going to be an opportunity to listen to them speak, but we want to listen to you as well. So as we go into the evening, if you've got some questions or there are ideas that you have that you want to ask any of these incredible people, we want to make time available for you to do this. But before we start, I just want to give it up to the folks at Counterculture. Can you please join me in thanking... What an incredible small business. A great story here in Santa Fe that we have here. Not only that, the food is pretty darn good. For those of you who know, Saturday and Sundays are pretty special over here at the Counterculture, reading the papers and enjoying your coffee and having some great food. So please continue to send them your business, a local business. They believe in sustainability, they believe in our environment, they believe in our future, and we have to stay supporting them. So I want to thank them for setting this up. So I'd like to ask our incredible panelists to come on up here, and I'm going to introduce them. Certainly one of the individuals who I am so incredibly privileged and honored, a person who has used his own time to sit with me and talk about, if I get the opportunity to become mayor of Santa Fe, things that I need to be thinking about. And for those of you who've read his book, know just what an incredible thrill it was for me to have breakfast with him one Saturday morning. Bill is nothing less than an environmental visionary of our times. He is a true living treasure right here in New Mexico. He is the author of 7 books, which range from a memoir and a biography to environmental history and studies of place. Now, Bill came to New Mexico in 1972, and he's maintained a deep relationship with the cultures and landscapes of the Southwest ever since. Bill's most recent book, at the universally acclaimed A Great Aridness, Climate Change and the Future of the American Southwest, was written in the tradition of John McPhee and Wallace Stegner. The story of the West is essentially a story about water, Dr. deBuys writes. Water, that is, and its lack. According to the New York Times, Bill paints a sweeping story encompassing global weather patterns, the mysterious histories and farming practices of the native people whose settlements rose and vanished in the desert, and the firefighters, biologists, anthropologists, water administrators, and others who deal with the increasing dryness today and seek to plan for an even drier tomorrow. Now, from 1997 to 2004, he developed and directed the Valle Grande Grass Bank, a cooperative effort involving ranchers, conservationists, and public agencies in the rehabilitation of rangelands in northern New Mexico. In 2000, the effort earned him the National Range Management Award of the U.S. Forest Service. And in 2001 and 2004, for all of you who remember those times when the Valle Grande was purchased and put into public hands, and all of us thought, who was going to manage it? How are we going to build the building blocks to preserve it for future generations? He was appointed by President Clinton to serve as a founding chairman of the Valles Caldera Trust, which administers the 89,000-acre Valles Caldera National Preserve under an experimental approach to the management of public lands. Please join me in welcoming the incredible Bill deBuys. Rosemary Romero was a city councilor from 2008 and 2012. Now, I didn't know this until I had an opportunity to read about it, but Councilor Romero served as the chair of the Santa Fe Regional Planning Authority, the North Central Transit District, the Santa Fe Solid Waste Management Agency. But as a consultant, Rosemary has written 9 watershed restoration action plans. She's conducted the public involvement for 3 regional water plans, as well as a statewide water plan. She is president of the Western Network, a nonprofit organization that focuses on natural resources. Rosemary is an expert in applying strategic planning and conflict resolution techniques to address environmental problems. Ladies and gentlemen, Rosemary Romero, City Councilor of Santa Fe. The next lady I met at a really cool event when I first started running for her office. And I showed up to a home and there was this lady, Mariel Nanasi, who was just lit up and excited about a new energy economy. And so as I got the chance to meet her, I said, I want her on our team. She is driven by her sense of urgency when it comes to climate change. She is a zealous organizer. Mariel's can-do spirit is infectious for all of us who get to know her. As comfortable with complex policy and legal challenges as on-the-ground organizing, she easily connects with the public, including young Hispanic artists, firefighters on the front lines, acequia caretakers, grassroots Native leaders, funders, and legislators. Mariel lectures on climate change and environmental justice at conferences and college classrooms, and her essay, A Future Without Coal, in New Mexico Supreme Court Again, can be read online. Please join me in welcoming the head of the New Energy Economy, Mariel Nanasi. One of the great privileges I had when I was chairman of the Democratic Party of New Mexico was to lead the fight for Democrats when it came to protecting the environment and working with conservation voters of New Mexico. Demis Foster is the executive director of the Conservation Voters of New Mexico. It's a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to protect New Mexico's environment and its cherished way of life. Before coming to CVNM, Demis was the Santa Fe director of the New Mexico Wilderness Alliance. Demis has over 20 years of grassroots organizing and advocacy experience both in New Mexico and throughout the West. She has worked hard to ensure protection for Chaco Canyon and our newly designated Rio Grande del Norte National Monument near Taos. Way to go. That's awesome. In 2004, Demis was awarded the National Leadership Award for outstanding leadership in protecting public lands for her work as the director of the Ancient Forest Roadshow, a year-long outreach tour with 2 teams traveling across the nation with a 1,000-pound crosscut section from an old-growth Douglas fir tree. Please join me in welcoming the Executive Director of Conservation Voters of New Mexico, Demis Foster. All right, so we're just going to get seated here. This conversation's going to get started. Kind of feel like the Hispanic Oprah. Try to figure it out. So I remember when I was actually sitting down with Bill, I had all kinds of questions, but I started out, and we're going to start this conversation with him, but I started out asking him, if I get this opportunity to be mayor, what are some of the things that I need to be thinking about? How do we as a city confront and deal with many of the environmental challenges facing us? And, if you've read his book, you could understand, some of the messages he gave to me, which was, you have to have healthy forests around Santa Fe and throughout northern New Mexico. You have to recognize that there are multiple issues that create threats directly to water and the environment in our community. And one of the things that he said to me over time is, and he's engraving it in my head, is resilience. You have to have and develop policies, much like building blocks, that develop resilience in our communities to allow us to move forward. So what I would love, if we can get started, Bill, is to share with the group that conversation that we had, and why, as a community, resilience becomes an issue when we talk about water, when we talk about wildland fires, when we talk about energy. Why is it that practicing and developing policies that show resilience, why is that so important?
Well, I think where it begins is just, for me at least, thinking about what is a city's duty to its citizens. on environmental matters. And, looking down the road toward the long future, we know we're going to have drought. We know we're going to have more fire. We know we're going to have environmental stresses of all kinds. But it seems to me the primary duty of the city to its people is to be sure that when those challenges come, we bend but we don't break. And that's what resilience is about, it seems to me, to be able to handle adversity and spring back from it and continue on as a community, as a united or we'll never be perfectly united, but as a group of people who realize we're in something together.
So when you look at, I'd like for you to talk a little bit about climate change and its impact on New Mexico. I know it's obviously having an impact around the globe, but in New Mexico, the data is showing that temperatures are rising, that we're seeing very erratic systems in weather patterns, and every year as a community, there's a major fire that either comes up over the Pecos or happens in the Conchas. Talk to us a little bit about climate change here in New Mexico, things that as a community we need to be thinking about. And then I want to talk about what can we be doing to fight it.
Well, we know that we're going to be hotter and we're going to be drier. And the drier part is interesting because even if precipitation stays steady, and don't bet your house on that, even if precipitation stays steady, we're going to be drier because the higher temperatures mean more evaporation. Even our House of Representatives in the nation's capital has not been able to repeal the law of evaporation. And so we're stuck with that. We're going to be hotter and drier, and extreme events are going to be more likely, more frequent, and more extreme. So these are all challenges that are going to be around us. We're going to deal with a lot of drought. We can't expect our water supply to stay steady. The climate models show that by mid-century, or they indicate by mid-century, the flow of our major rivers in the region, the Colorado River, the Rio Grande, is probably going to drop by 10 to 30%. That's a big drop-off for water systems that are already oversubscribed. And the hotter temperatures mean a lot more stress on the trees. We're going to see tree diebacks. We're going to see more fire. We're probably going to see more beetle outbreaks. All of these things. So all of these things are going to stress us. And meanwhile, we got to keep living, and we got to live in a habitable place, and we have energy challenges, and something that you mentioned a little while ago about trails and so forth. Santa Fe's economy is tied to the environment. Santa Fe's identity is tied to the environment. So Santa Fe needs to think about how it presents itself. Are we a city of trails or a city of parking lots? What is our relationship to the environment, and how do we communicate that to the people who are interested in our city?
One of the individuals that responded so many years ago and said the city, there were many that did it, but one of the individuals that was there leading the efforts that the city needed to be aggressive in creating a healthier watershed was Rosemary Romero. And Rosemary, I'd like for you to share with us when we talk about the importance of local government to get involved in the battle on climate change. Talk to us about where you see the opportunities or the challenges for local governments to develop policy that will combat climate change and help protect our water and our clean air for future generations.
Thank you, Javier, and welcome to folks that I consider my neighborhood. Live back here in Casa Linda, and to Felicity Brennan, who's the former executive director of Santa Fe Watershed, and I think there's a couple of other folks who are related to the watershed and have done quite a bit of work. Thank you for the work that you've done in our watershed. Today has been kind of an interesting day. I've spent the day, a good part of the day, at the Regional Water Planning Dialogue meeting. And what it affirmed to me is, I don't know if folks know this, but our state is made up of 16 regional water plans. And the water plan that helps guide Santa Fe's water and watershed is the MSC Sangre Regional Water Plan. So I want to say something that we've done right what we've done right has been to embrace our water planning efforts. And to those folks who have participated in the Hemesi Sangre Regional Water Plan, we have a really good plan. We've done the forward thinking of watershed thinning, and many, many years ago, I just recall that we did planning without talking about watersheds. And even the Forest Service in their work and in their planning efforts, what they talk about is watershed planning. And I just recall working up north on several of these watershed plans is folks doing something right, which is it's up to you to figure out how you want to look in the future. And so some of these little places beyond Santa Fe are these little watersheds north of Santa Fe. But it reminds me that we are all a watershed, and that's the kind of planning that we do is related beyond us. And what Santa Fe has done, I think that we've done well, has been reaching beyond us. The Hemesi Sangre Regional Water Plan is one that I would say has gone beyond Santa Fe, that we have to talk with our neighbors, we have to plan together, and that we can't do things in isolation. In working with the Forest Service, in particularly around fire planning and other kinds of planning efforts, and particularly the collaborative forest restoration. Brian, it's good to see you. You were right there from the very beginning, Brian Bird. And this is something that I share with Brian and others, is the work around collaborative forest planning. So at its core of when we say planning, I want to say what some of the things that Santa Fe's done right and that we should continue to do has been around regional water efforts, and that we can't do this alone. Today's meeting underscored again, lest there's, as Bill had said, is we are facing a drought. We're in it. We're not getting out of it. We have less money, we have less resources. So I think at its core has been this underscoring of collaboration. And I when I got on city council, it was interesting to me as I thought folks knew what that word meant. And it was an eye-opener, and I'm seeing that as a future for things that we have to do better, and that we've done right, but we have to do better, has been working as a council, working as a region. Some of the regional efforts have really underscored again for me that we can't do it alone. We are in this together. And looking at how forest thinning affects water, we haven't quite quantified what that means yet, but we do know that if approximately 40% of our water comes from a watershed, what are the things that we do to help our watershed? I don't know if folks knew this part is Santa Fe is one of two other cities in the country who have passed environmental services regulation. If we have a catastrophic fire, we are wiped out. We look at the Gallinas watershed; they will have years, if generations, not years, generations, where they can't undo the harm from catastrophic fires. Santa Fe's done that right, and I think that was passed during my time, and I thank the Nature Conservancy for their work with us in helping get that passed, because we were looking forward. It's not fires are going to happen. That's what we're living with. Is not it's when they happen. Not trying to eliminate, they're going to happen. But I think that's one of the things that we've done right has been to look forward, to try to protect our environment. As working from a regional perspective, there's a whole lot of other things that we can talk about around transportation. But I think today I'm on that water mode, forest mode, and I think it's been. I'm really honored to have been in this field for this long, because it's put me in touch with people who care deeply about their environment. From the little watersheds in Embudo to the little watersheds off of the Rio Hondo and the Rio Fernando, down in the Mimbres. What I've heard from folks is their commitment to really doing what they can to prevent, to really plan carefully and to work together. So I'm going to underscore that together, because I think that's what's critical for us moving into the future, is looking out for our watersheds, looking out for our water, doing water planning carefully, and doing it together. I don't know if I answered all the questions, because I'm looking forward to some of those questions from the audience on some of these issues.
Absolutely. I mean, and it is something that we've talked about, that we can't, our opportunities and our threats, the threats and the opportunities in Santa Fe don't stop at our boundaries. Unless we recognize as a community that having regional agencies and people who influence what happens at the table, identifying our priorities and allocating resources, we're always going to be under the enormous amounts of threat that can take place outside of our boundaries. So I think what you've talked about, Councilor, is important. I saw Nate Downey here. He's one of the individuals that I love reading his columns because he's like this thought leader right here in Santa Fe, talking about water harvesting and certainly I know you've talked about permeable sidewalks as policy issues. So I wanted to give a shout out to you, Melissa, and say thank you for sharing with us your thoughts whenever you can and through whatever venues you do. It's incredible. So thank you for So when we talk about water, I sat down with Mariel, and she is so passionate about recognizing that we have so many other alternatives than having to use fossil fuel. And she introduced me to something I never thought about, which is, I wanted to talk a little bit, about the San Juan Generation Station and the amount of water that's consumed, the millions of gallons of water that's consumed to produce energy using fossil fuel. And it was for me a recognition that we can talk about conserving water in Santa Fe, we can talk about regional planning of climate threats, but there are things that are pretty far away from us that are impacting water here in New Mexico, or water quality for us. And Santa Fe has spent a bunch of time and money buying water from the San Juan Chama River. It's the same river that provides water to the San Juan Generation Station. And it just seems like a huge conflict for me that when you think about that river being used, which is already over allocated, as Bill has told us many times over, that we've got to find ways to get involved in areas that are further away from Santa Fe. So I'd love for Mariel to talk to us a little bit about why we should care about what happens at the San Juan generation and what it means to move off of fossil fuel and become more independent of it.
Thank you. Yeah?
That's right.
Hello? Okay. Thank you. I don't know how many people in the audience know where our electricity comes from, but 60% of our electricity comes from the San Juan Generating Station. So PNM is the owner and operator of that. They are an electric monopoly that serves about 500,000 New Mexicans with electricity. 60% comes from coal, from that plant and another plant called the Four Corners plant. And then 20% comes from nuclear. PNM actually imports nuclear from Arizona. And then about 15% comes from gas, and then only 4% from wind, and how much is left? 1% from solar. 1% from solar. In the state that has the sunzia on our flag. We know what it's like, even in the winter time when we're out enjoying this most beautiful, beautiful place. If I think of one thing that unifies all New Mexicans and certainly all Santa Feans, it's the love of place. And if we love the place that we live, we have to honor the place that we live because it feeds us. It literally feeds us in every single way. It's the earth that gives us our food, and it's the water that we drink and the water that grows our agriculture. And so we have to take care of it. We have to be better stewards because we haven't. And really the fact of the matter is that PNM's choice of energy stands in the way of us being responsible for climate. It also, when we talk about conservation, sometimes I hear those fabulous ads that the city plays about turning off your water when you're brushing your teeth or or something like that. But the fact of the matter is it's eensy. It's eensy-beensy compared to the water usage that is used from coal and nuclear. And the water that's used from coal, just that one plant, think about this one statistic, it's 8 billion gallons of clean water in, toxic water out every year. That's 18,000 gallons a minute That's 18,000 gallons a minute from coal. And just today I learned that the entire city of Chicago, that's 800,000 homes, gets its electricity, and they refuse to buy coal. We could do that. We could do that in Santa Fe. There's one other thing that I want to talk about air. And I just want to show you this one thing, because I took this picture. So we have to, my friend Toby, who's here, tells me that, thank you, tells me that I have to think like an ecosystem if we want to solve the problems. And the first is systems thinking. And so the coal from this electricity makes kids like this, who's 5 years old. His name is Camium Woody. He lives under the toxic shadow of the coal plant. Thank you. He can't breathe. He can't breathe without the use of this pump. That is a crime against our own people. My daughter's here. I got into this work because I want her to have a habitable planet. I want her to breathe. And that plant not only uses all this water, but it's the major source of pollution in New Mexico. 12 million tons of carbon every year. It's also the major source of air pollution. The major source of air pollution. We can close that plant, and Santa Fe could be a leader, not only in New Mexico, but I think in the country to lead as a green tourism. I mean, we wouldn't be just saying that we have green tourism, but we'd be living it if we say we reject coal. We don't want to get our electricity from coal. It's not good for the planet. It's not good for the environment, and it's not good for our children. Thank you.
Now you know what she's You know why she's so infectious. I mean, it's pretty awesome. There's excitement. It's great. You know, and this conversation actually led me to have a conversation with the Sierra Club, who endorsed our candidacy. Thank you, Sierra Club. And this goes along also with the conversation that I had with Bill about the opportunity in Santa Fe to develop community solar, to take advantage of where we are strategically located and really use renewable energy to fuel the grid right here in our community. Now, the city has taken some great steps. There are about 25% of their buildings have distributed generation on them, but we need to go to 100%. And I think that we can do it in no short order.
Sold, not coal.
Sold, right?
Sold, not coal.
Sold, not coal. And one of the so going back to the conversation I had with Bill was he said, wouldn't it be great if people in the community who didn't have distributed generation and certainly their rooftops weren't going to work, that there was a place for them to invest in and be able to get some kind of return back, but be able to benefit from the development of where that investment was going, which was for the creation of community solar. And so I proposed that we create Santa Fe Verde. And Santa Fe Verde would basically be a vehicle by which to create capital so that we can retrofit homes in our community, retrofit businesses, develop community solar, and do all the things that Mariel has so eloquently stated, and really take our first giant step in being able to reduce our dependence on fossil fuel. And I think that that's one of those first steps that we need to do. I also want to recognize, thank you. I see Commissioner Paul Campos, who's in the room, and a quick story. Paul and I served towards my latter part on the county commission, but it was about the time that he came in that I think certainly at the county and it moved to the city, started thinking about how can we do things smarter, better when it comes to renewable energy, or rethinking the way we do development in the community so it doesn't have such a big environmental impact. So I want to thank you for being here and everything you've done, Commissioner. So all of us get frustrated. Sometimes we beat our heads against the wall because we get it, but the politicians somehow don't seem to get it. And one of the things that CVNM has to do on a daily basis is herd those cats. Help them understand how important their votes are. And it's a tough job. I can tell you, being with them at the Capitol, that even for some of our friends in the Democratic legislature, sometimes they just don't go where you need them to go. So I want Denise to talk about the challenges in the regulatory environment, and we talked a little bit about P&M and this effort to really make sure that the PRC doesn't push more requirements for renewable energy. I believe that they're going to ask us as ratepayers to cover about $250 million for them to shut down parts of the San Juan generation plant because they made a bad business decision. So the regulatory environment almost is everything when it comes to how we're able to move forward as a community. So Demis gets to deal with that on a daily basis. God bless her for that. But talk to us about how are we doing? You guys do the scorecards. Tell us about how's New Mexico doing when it comes to protecting our environment, being able to develop policy that's good for our state.
Well, as you all know, or probably know, we have an administration right now that is anti-environment, anti-conservation. We are in absolute gridlock with this administration to move any kind of positive policy on our land, air, and water. The legislative session is getting ready to start in just a couple of weeks. So it has been a real challenge because when we go into the building, to the Roundhouse, we're outspent 6-1 by industry lobbyists who are getting paid a lot of money. And there's a lot of them who are, running around the Roundhouse making sure that industry's interests come first. And we have a citizens legislature. So we have people who most likely have full-time jobs, and they're coming to serve in the Roundhouse, and they're dealing with hundreds of bills. And, politics are tricky, so you'll get a bill in front of you and the name of it sounds great. But you need someone behind the scenes reading the bills and educating the legislators on what it really means, because they don't really have time to do that. They're overwhelmed as it is. So that's why it's so important for constituents, for them to hear from their constituents like you. They need to hear, and believe me, when they hear, they contact me. And they're like, what are you guys doing right now? What's happening? I'm hearing from people in my district. We're really lucky to have Senator Peter Wirth and Representative Brian Egolf. These two have been amazing, and they have done tireless work in the Roundhouse to protect our land, air, and water. But they don't have a conservation majority backing them up. So it's a real challenge for them. So what we need to do in Santa Fe is make sure that, and across the state, that we're letting our legislators know what's important to us, and we're getting in touch with them. I met with legislators all day today, and we were talking about the bills that are coming down the pipe. And let me tell you, it's not pretty. It is bad. It is really bad. We have so many rollbacks that are going to be introduced in this session. I mean, we have 8 major ones that are going to be coming down the pipe that roll back protections for our water, that allow loopholes for industry to pollute our groundwater. We're going to have probably a uranium bill that comes down to protect the uranium industry. I mean, it's bad stuff that's coming down the pike. I hate to be the depressing person here.
Keep it real. Keep it real.
So we're going to be juggling a lot of bills, and we're going to be in the Roundhouse with industry lobbyists who are trying to push these things through. And the problem with having Susana Martinez in office is that she is going to be behind the industry to make sure this happens. So what's really important is that we have someone in local government here in Santa Fe at the municipal level that is a conservation champion, backing up our other heroes like Senator Wirth and Representative Egolf. Someone that knows how to build partnerships, knows how to activate diverse networks of people who has built those bridges across the community, because Santa Fe is the home of the Roundhouse. This is the city where all the legislators come from across the state. And if we have someone in office that is a conservation champion, that is going to be huge. It's going to be a huge testament to what New Mexico is, what New Mexicans care about. And so the way that local government spans to the Roundhouse is very important. So I urge everyone to keep abreast of what's happening in the Roundhouse. Contact your legislators. We have a scorecard. So we keep track of the conservation votes, and I'll tell you, it keeps a lot of legislators on their toes because they don't want a bad score. So we score them on how they vote, and you can see how your legislator does on our website, and you can track bills on our protectnewmexico.org website, so you can really understand what's happening by the minute. And I'll tell you, it changes by the minute. So
it's also easy to become a member, which and they need our resources. If you haven't joined the Conservation Voters of New Mexico, I mean, you can put in $10 a month, all the way up to 100, 200, whatever you can do. But all of that goes to the legislative advocacy that they work on. And one of the things that Demis talked to you about, and certainly, I recognize it because I've been there with her, is that lobbyists are well-funded and they're incredibly powerful. And so your voices many times are heard, but it helps amplify your voices when they have the resources to be able to get to our legislators. So she didn't ask me to do that either, but I do think that we need to support them. I want to go back to Bill because one of the things that my grandpa always used to tell me, growing up on Canyon Road, is la agua es la vida, and water is life. And I didn't really quite understand what he meant. I think he understood it much bigger. I always thought it was being able to splash around in the Acequia Madre, going and playing in the Santa Fe River. That was life to me as a kid. But I think he was talking about something bigger, recognizing that our identity as a community is matched with that acequia flowing or the river being able to flow. But in your book, you spend a lot of time going back in time, looking at farmers, and you embedded yourself in communities that have struggled over time with water. What can we learn from our history? I mean, what is some of the things that pop out that today we can learn from to help us confront some of the threats that we're facing?
Well, I think the biggest thing we learn from history, they're not, perfect little parables and just so stories, but one thing we do learn from our history is that we have to live with uncertainty. And that the water supply that we have today is not necessarily the water supply that we're going to have tomorrow. And so that's where we need to have all kinds of backup systems for our water life. And that's where that idea of resilience comes in again. Because if you lose this aspect of it, then you've got Plan B, you've got Plan C, you've got ways to adapt. And one thing I'll throw out here real quickly is just that, I know everybody here really believes in water conservation, and it is so important. But alone, it's not the answer that we need. And here's the reason, because if we all conserve water, does that add to our resilience? Well, it does if that water goes into, the saved water goes into some kind of reserve, something that gives us more options down the road, something that will help us when times get tough. But it doesn't add to our resilience if our conserved water just goes to the next strip mall down the road or the next housing development. And I'm not anti-growth. And we do need water for growth, but we also need to think really explicitly about how our water policies help us with long-term resistance. Economists have a fancy term called demand hardening for all of this. And we don't need to get into it now, but one thing I would hope, two things I would hope. One is that this man to my left is our next mayor. And two, that when he's there, he can direct our water utility to explicitly plan for these kinds of problems, for avoiding that demand hardening cycle where we conserve, but we only paint ourselves into a corner because all the conserved water is put to use. And not many communities have had the foresight or the nerve to take these kinds of issues on straight up. And frankly, I don't know of any community that has really solved this problem. But we need to have an explicit dialogue about it in Santa Fe, and we need to have our water utility really working hard on this question.
It was incredible when I sat down with him and he shared this with me. He says it's going to be hard decisions. You cannot conserve water just so you can plan for future growth. You conserve it because you don't know what tomorrow is going to bring and the impacts on your existing populations. That was a huge knowledge moment for me. And I want to ask Rosemary, because so much of what you do deals in conflict, resolution. How are we as a community going to be able to get through that conflict, to be able to have those hard conversations, and really start making the difficult decisions the right way, so that we're able to embed this resilience in our policies? How do you bring, I have ideas on how to bring people together, but this is really about you too.
Well, and thank you, because it's like, oh no, she's going to talk about conflict, right? Run out of the room. But quite often when an agency has called me, or an Acequia association has called me, or a community has called me, and I've done mediation throughout the state, conflict resolution, and that includes facilitation and public involvement. It's usually when somebody's they're in the fight. And I think it's important that you get people who already have skills, and you can find those in little pockets. I remember talking to Mayor Koss, who, as I said to him yesterday, you are my mayor, and I'm sad to see you leave, but I'm hopeful that we're going to have another great mayor. Is that we need people with skills who have a collaborative nature, and that some of it is natural, some of it is you can get trained. But I think what at its core, I just remember driving back with Bill one time when we were talking about what creates community change, and we had this whole conversation about the chispa. And the chispa is that spark, and it just takes maybe one chispa. Maybe that's a wildfire, but it's one person in a leadership role who has the respect to actually move things forward. Sometimes they're really small. I'll just talk about it's great hearing my fellow panelists here talk about some of these bigger global issues around the state, and sometimes we just need those little chispas. And I recall that sometimes it's about education, and because I'm thinking a lot about my mother these days, who's 86 years old and pretty fragile in many ways, but she was born on a ranch, and I grew up on a ranch near Ottawa Bridge. My mom grew up in Sombrio. And I remember when she was talking, one of those times that I was working up north on a watershed plan, and she said, I'm really mad at my neighbor. We've got this acequia. I'm really mad at my neighbor, and I don't know what to do. I'm getting suds coming down my acequia, and I don't know what to do. And so I said, well, one thing you can do is you can talk to the New Mexico Environment Department. She said, who are they? And I said, well, you get a jelly jar. She got a little jelly jar full of water from her acequia. She took it down to the New Mexico Environment Department, and an agency then went to talk with everybody else up the stream. It's an educational piece, but it's about trying to figure out what the problem is, that it's not just about me. And I'll say today was a good example that getting decision makers in place who go beyond me, beyond the agenda of self, to really start thinking regionally. And I think that's one of the things that's critical for a decision maker, which I believe you are going to be our next decision maker in that role, is somebody who is looking beyond what you owe somebody or what you're going to do right here. It's looking beyond. And to get my mom to think about the sudsy water, what she wanted to improve on her acequia was the beyond her moment to then other people up the acequia are also getting suds. So it became more about a larger effort than just her. And I think that's part of it. I've always believed, and I thought when I got on council, that one of the things that would be really helpful is to have a collaborative problem-solving workshop. Imagine that. Because I thought that might be helpful to bring people together in an effort to talk about, well, what is important to you? And I think in communities, just to ask that question, what's important to you? How does that fit into a larger picture? But keep that conversation going is critical. And I know for the dialogue work, dialogue. But it's that conversation. It's not easy. A colleague, Carl Moore, calls collaboration the devil's work sometimes, because it's messy. It's messy and it's hard, but you got to engage. And I think that's part of a role of a decision maker, is to roll up your sleeves and have that dialogue. And it's not easy, but I think that it's helpful to have those chispas that can help spark the conversation.
I don't think anyone in here really believes that the city on its own can solve our most pressing threats. You know, the need to bring the county, the tribal governments to the table and have some concrete agreements and policies, I think is really the only way. And then we need to grow it. We need to grow it beyond the boundaries of Santa Fe County and some of the tribal governments. But speaking about that, I want to ask Demis about Los Alamos, because a lot of us, recognize that we have this economic engine up in Los Alamos. A third of our workforce works up there. But we also recognize that there are threats that come when they're not properly funding the environmental cleanup. And there's, I believe, about 1 million barrels of hazardous waste that's sitting in unlined pits today, and they're moving to ask the state of New Mexico to allow that to be permanent storage. So talk to us about Los Alamos and how do we get them to, or what do we need to do to make sure that the environmental threats that they pose by being up on the hill are properly addressed? Is it just a federal solution? Is it state? What is it that we can do?
Well, we have a facility called WHIP down in the southern part of the state. It's a bit of a complicated issue and a contentious issue among our delegation. Congressman Steve Pierce would like us to open up WHIP to all kinds of transuranic waste from all over the country, from commercial sources, in the name of jobs. When at Los Alamos, we have a backlog of waste, a huge backlog of waste that needs to be disposed of properly, and that's what WHIP was meant for. It was meant to put, government waste, defense waste into a properly, into the proper place. And so we need to loosen up that gridlock so that we can create jobs here and at Los Alamos to get that waste moved to a safe place. Because right now, where it is not a safe place. It needs to be moved. And so we need to get people like Steve Pierce off this mantra that we need to open up other kinds of waste from other states. We need to focus on Los Alamos right here. I think that's the biggest, most pressing issue right now.
Very good. Well, before we open it up, I'm going to ask one more question of Mariel, because this one kind of really brought the issue of you can have these great ideas and we can really talk about it, but there are some realities. And so I asked her the question. I said, Mariel, the retrofits are great, but let's swing for the fences. Let's do community solar, build enough capacity, and just supply it 100% to Santa Fe. And I was shocked by the answer, right? So I need you to kind of help us talk, to understand that the hurdles that we have to overcome as a community to make that a reality. That even if we're able to develop community solar that is plentiful for us to use in the grid, there are barriers that exist to making that happen.
You didn't tell me you were going to ask me this question. How do I... So
You don't have to be politically correct. This group definitely gets it.
Okay, so let me just ask you this. Do you get the idea of community solar? There's some people who can't put it on their house. So if you live in parts of the historic district or you rent, basically the first idea is that, okay, you say, I'm going to invest $1,000 or $2,000 and I get X amount of panels. And for whatever the electricity that is produced by those panels, I get to offset my electricity bill usage, right? Okay, so that's how it works because I have solar on my house. I haven't paid P&M in 3 years. Last year they paid me $750. Anybody who wants solar, everybody who can, do it. It's fabulous. It's totally liberating. I'm gonna pay myself or my family's back before it because it's outproducing. And for some of the people in here know that. We can talk about that after. So community solar, that's the idea of it. The fact is that P&M doesn't want people to get solar on their house because, as the vice president said to me, you're cannibalizing my business. That's exactly what he said. And he said, I do not know how to make money on solar. And I thought to myself, I didn't say this, but I thought, and I'm sharing with you, then you shouldn't be in the energy business. Because we have a great resource. Former Governor Richardson said we are the Saudi Arabia of solar. We have the second greatest potential for solar in New Mexico, and as I told you before, we haven't actualized it. And I don't look at my daughter and say, oh, you have so much potential, and then walk away. I say, actualize it, I want to see the grades, I want to see, And so here we have this opportunity, and I think it would fortify Santa Fe to have more solar. We will create more jobs, family-supporting jobs, and then we could take responsibility, as I said, for both climate and water conservation and also for our air. I forgot to say something before, which I just feel like I should tell you, is that San Juan coal plant also, 75% of all waterways in New Mexico have mercury poisoning, and it comes from that plant. The other thing I wanted you to know is, that brown line of haze? When I first came to New Mexico, there wasn't that brown line of haze at sunsets. That brown line of haze comes from the San Juan plant, and it's why EPA came in and said, hey, you have so much, you're polluting so much. Did you know that in 2008, the New Mexico Environment Department issued 60,000 air quality violations against P&M San Juan plant? That's the kind of pollution we are. We are the environment. We are not separate from the environment. We have to act like it's our mother. We have to protect her like that. And solar doesn't harm the environment. And we have an opportunity to not only do community solar, but also what's called distributed solar on your house. Currently, P&M is finding community solar. Anyway, we'll see how that works out. But I have a bigger and bolder idea, which is to have Santa Fe leave P&M and say, thank you very much. You just warmed my heart with that applause, because I think that's the way we have to go.
It clearly is. I mean, the opportunity, certainly, the need to show courage here in the city, where when you lay out those bold plans to create community solar, and you're met with obstruction, that you have to be prepared to identify alternatives and pathways. Because as Mariel so eloquently stated, we don't want to be denied an incredible opportunity to do our part just because, you have a big entity, a monopoly that controls the regulatory environment. And I think that's something that we all have to prepare for as a community, to have that very substantive dialogue and be prepared for ultimately what it means. So tonight was about a conversation. Join me in clap and really giving a round of applause for what we heard. It's certainly why I'm so humbled. I mean, to listen to Bill deBuys look over and say, this is why I want this guy as mayor, I got to tell you, it is... It's frightful, but it also comes with a great sense of responsibility. For people like Bill to, for the thought leadership and the movements he's created around the world to say, here's the person I think that can do it in Santa Fe, means a lot. But what it also means is being able to have people around a mayor that you can rely on to be able to offer the ideas and formulate the solutions. I want to hold them up here a little bit longer and turn it over to you to ask some questions that you might be having. We don't actually have a mic out there, so if you're gonna ask a question, we need you to kind of speak a little bit loud, but this is open forum, so have at it.
How much does it cost to put solar in my house?
So the question, I think, is as going to more details, is how affordable is it for distributed generation today, and is it getting less expensive?
First of all, the price of solar has basically almost halved since I got it on my house. That's why I didn't want to answer you. But it's still cost effective. And I'll just give you one example. New Energy Economy partnered with the county and just did solarized a fire station in Tesuque. The bill the month before was $128.60 or something like that, and the next month it was $2.50, and it wasn't even a whole month. So right away you can save, and I'm hoping that we will see the city and county take really bold efforts. And the city is really already doing a great job of solarizing its own facilities, but I'm hoping that that we'll solarize all the municipal facilities. And depending on how much your electric bill, I can't just make a number up. It depends on how much your current usage is. But I will say that one of the things that we've been talking about is having the city, maybe you want to say something. Javier is talking about having financing, especially for low-income people to solarize their homes.
I mean, I think it's time for us to have the honest discussions about developing a public bank in our community. A bank that makes affordable loans. And the model's out there. Montana has a public bank. Other communities do. North Dakota.
Yeah.
The reality is that it's tough for middle and lower income families to go access traditional loans in our community, and so the city and the county need to take leadership positions, and through Santa Fe Verde I want to create that investment capital that can be lent back into the community, that we can look at developing public banking options for our community. So I think that's one of the things that we have to really go down and be able to address. Next question in the back. Can you stand up and ask your question?
What is the city's relationship with P&M, and how does that affect what does that look like practically?
So the question is, what is the current relationship between the city and the P&M, and what would it take for the city to lead P&M?
We had a contract with this P&M. It expired 10 years ago because people in Santa Fe said don't re-up with P&M. So we are on sort of like a month-to-month lease kind of thing with them. So that's one good thing. It's very good for us. There's a number of different pathways that we could take to become our own municipal utility. The short answer is working with the county, so the city and county, again, a do it together as opposed to do it alone strategy. If we did it with the county, then we could use the county's authority for eminent domain to basically say we would like to exercise our authority to become a municipal utility and to distribute electricity. And then instead of all the profits from electricity going to Wall Street, $20 million every year leaves just from the city of Santa Fe. Imagine if that stayed here and was produced with solar instead of coal and nuclear.
Okay, next. So we're going to come over here. I'm going to go front, back, so we'll come up here and then we'll move to the back. Yes, can you stand up?
My quick question is, what would provide baseload power in lieu of solar?
The question is, what would provide that base load power in lieu of solar?
Well, I just found out that there are lots of, today actually, that there are lots of towns and cities in the United States already, like Oak Park, Illinois, that gets 100% of its electricity from renewables. There would probably be New Mexico also has a lot of wind. They say that there's 15,000 megawatts of wind, and the whole state only uses 2,000 or 2,500, 2,200, I think. It is. So it would be solar and wind, and there would be some gas backup that would regulate for intermittency. But there's all these cool things that people are doing all over the country. Like there's free Saturdays that I just learned about. There's different places where there's smart grids. So if you were told, okay, on Saturday your electricity is free, then you could decide, okay, I'm going to cook all my meals on Saturday and I'm going to do all the stuff for the week. Or, I mean, there's things that we could do that could actually be fun. And I think would bring us again together. So there's a challenge, but I think in Santa Fe, I haven't met a single engineer who's told me that it's not possible.
The cool thing about wind is it doesn't stop when the sun goes down. And so the great opportunity in New Mexico is to tap that. So New Energy Economy, you can definitely find them on the website. I want to open it up for some non-acquisition questions because we're going to continue that dialogue here in Santa Fe. That's not going to go away. The constant, because Mariel's not going to go away, and she's going to continually push. She's going to push this issue and make sure that it happens. Next question.
Back to the WIP issue. I don't think WIP was built to ever take all of the nation's pure weapons and waste, and maybe they pretend that they were, but they're not. No. What can a city do as far as the feds go with producing nuclear weapons waste, which I believe they are, mostly in Los Alamos?
Well, you know, my view, I mean, I think the city, it's important that we take an active role in having a say in the mission in Los Alamos. That means that we have to have the ability to leave the state, go to Washington, and have a presence. It means that we need to work with the county and the tribal governments and the surrounding counties. It means that we need to have a dialogue with the people leading Los Alamos, like the University of California, and really weigh in as decisions are made at DOE, the Congress or the appropriations level. We have Tom, who sits on federal appropriations, Ben Ray, who's on the Energy Oversight Committee. Those are all incredible relationships that I have, but it means that, you know, having that continuous dialogue so that the mission of Los Alamos we don't have this mission creep into areas that are going to generate some of the harmful waste that Los Alamos was never set up to deal with. And the fact that today they're going to the state of New Mexico to ask them to store hazardous waste in unlined pits tells us that they're already trying to move away from their obligations. And so what the city can absolutely do is have a rightful seat at the table, a voice when it comes to addressing the mission of Los Alamos and being very vigilant in making sure if there's any movement outside of it that we are pulling together the resources and the lobbying threats to address it. Yes.
If I could, I saw several hands, but just as a reminder, how many folks remember what the highway was called originally?
The whip route.
The whip route. The relief?
Oh, yeah.
Relief
Oh, yeah.
route. Then it became 599, and now it's the Veterans Highway, right? I think Memorial Highway. But what so we took money as a city because we didn't want waste coming down St. Francis Drive. We had this way to get it out around us. That was the original intention of that relief route. But now the new reality is that we have what's called the Lanel Communities Coalition. And the purpose of that coalition was to bring together the decision makers in 4 counties, which was Santa Fe, Rio Arriba, Los Alamos, and Taos. Because of the major employment that Los Alamos National Laboratory does. It's economic. We thrive because of Los Alamos in many ways. But the biggest issue, I think, that anybody coming into a position as mayor is to take leadership around the remediation of waste. I agree with the WIP is a big issue, but let's clean up what we have because our water being contaminated is not okay. These are generational issues, and what we have is finite. So this is huge to hold Los Alamos accountable, to clean up. And the Lanel Coalition purpose was to bring these decision makers to work together to hold Los Alamos accountable. And I know, talking to Mayor Koss, it's a struggle. Rio Arriba's holding back a little bit. I think it's going to take some leadership to say we're all in this together. We agree that it's an economic driver, but do we have to die by it?
Well, and the economic driver of that is to participate in the cleanup. And you know, one of the things that Los Alamos does that we have to push back as a community is they'll say, oh, that's $13 billion. It's just too expensive. And they'll overinflate the cost of doing any type of cleanup. And I think that as a community, we need to lead the way to say, no, that's not true. And we can make a big dent on $1 billion worth of a cleanup. But that's all local jobs that's driven in the community to do some of that. So you're right that leading the way and making sure that they honor their commitment to clean up is important, but there is a lot of propaganda that sometimes comes out so that they can deflate any of our views of whether the financial resources are there. Let me come up to you.
Can I just say one other thing too with that? Have any of you gone to Los Alamos and seen how close that Los Conchas fire came to literally across the street? And if you go up there and you see that wasteland and you go up to some of those mesas and you look down, you know how fast the fire was burning so fast it burned an acre a second. Think about that, an acre a second. And you go up there and you see this, and that's how close we were to that plant and to all of that waste. So there is a lot of, we're talking about climate and how it intersects with some of our energy choices and weapons decisions.
270,000 people in the community rely on water resources in the area. We know that because of the location, a lot of the volcanic rock sits there, and so those unlined pits, the access straight into the aquifer is pretty easy. So those are the reasons that we got to be concerned about. Let me come over here because you've been patient. And then
You've covered almost everything, but I want to ask: have you heard the metaphor that the waste plus the dirt that surrounds it would fill the Empire State Building?
I haven't.
All right, it would fill the Empire State Building. But the resolution that came before the council December 11th and passed unanimously will be a long slog through the different levels of government. Are you with it?
Yeah, look, I've written letters to Peter, who chairs the Conservation Committee. I've written letters to Brian, who chairs the Energy Committee, and I've asked them to hold public hearings, bringing in the New Mexico Environment Department to answer to them as legislators for the area and also leaders of their committee to really say, you're not being serious about granting permanent location, are you? And if you are, then the legislature needs to move very quickly to remove those barriers. And that's, again, where CBNM becomes incredibly important for all of our efforts. I promise I'd go back and then one, so let me go to you, sir, and then we'll come to you. And then I'll go back this way.
One of the
Would you stand up, please?
Sure.
We can't hear. Thanks.
One of the sort of interesting legacies of Mayor Bloomberg in New York has been to see sort of the nexus of progress on climate change and environmental issues move from national governments to city governments. And I want to direct this question mostly at Mr. Debuys, because in your book, A Great Area Is, you talk a lot about how Las Vegas, Nevada, is a city that's driving water policy in the West. And I wanted to just hear your views on the way Santa Fe could be a leader in driving the water policy at the city level to influence national and state level water policy.
Well, I think that's a great question, and I completely agree that local governments have a lot of influence. They not only can advocate for change, but they can model how you do it. And that's one of the reasons why I think for the state of New Mexico, as Demis was talking about, we are the state capital. If we model how to have a strong community here, all our legislators see that. Las Vegas is a strange thing out in the Colorado system. I know people have pretty strong feelings about Las Vegas, but the interesting thing is that the water leadership out of Las Vegas, as controversial as it is, has been sort of revolutionary in that it hasn't been the old farm and ranch and good old boys with big belt buckles making deals. So it just takes, again, as Rosemary said, that chispa, that spark that gets things going. And I'll just tell a little anecdote here that I shared with Javier. which comes to my mind all the time when I'm thinking about community. A guy named Bill McKibben, probably most of you all know him. He's the country's best known advocate on climate change, and quite involuntarily. I mean, Bill started out as a writer. He just found himself in this. Well, one time somebody came up to Bill and said, okay, we know climate change is happening, so and we know we need to stop greenhouse gas pollution. We know we need to do this and that. But what can I do just to adapt in my own life and to live with a kind of defense against all these changes? And Bill's answer was, live in a strong community. So the follow-up question was, well, how do I find a strong community? And Bill's answer was, you don't. You build it. And so in a way, that to me is the real mission for Santa Fe. If we build a strong community, and if we have the leadership really helping us to build a strong community, I think of the mayor as kind of the general contractor of the construction project. If we do that, believe me, other people will notice, other people will model their communities on Santa Fe, and we can really start some change.
We have a question up here, and then I'm going to go to the back.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up the issue of fracking. I testified for an anti-fracking bill last legislature, and it was just shocking because the testimony that was given, it was so obvious that the thing to do was to ban fracking. All the testimony, the scientific data, the people that showed up to witness what it was doing to their land and to their way of life. It was as if the legislators, and maybe this question is addressed to you, Denise, it was as if the legislators were living on another planet. And everything went in one ear and out the other, and there was no common sense to the result of this incredible effort to bring some truth, scientific truth, to this group of people who were going to make this decision. And I left, I'm a long-time activist, I left really feeling disillusioned in the complete inability to get through to these people. The legislature, which I've heard said, not only here but in other parts of the country, that this is the most corrupt in the country. How do we get through to these people? I mean, I know that we are here talking about a city, and this is very exciting that we have all this brilliance happening here and all this wonderful energy and heart and soul. But the fact is that in the legislature, it's where these decisions are made that govern, that we are in the end helpless about, because the mayor only controls the municipal area. What, in your view, you obviously work a lot in the legislature, what can the city do to play a role, a really powerful role, as it happens here in our city, this legislature, this corruption is going on in our city.
Okay, there's a lot of levels to that question.
Please stay there.
Yeah.
The question is, what can be done at the legislative level to address the fracking that's going on in the state? Is the first question. The second one is, what does Demis feel like the cities, the municipalities, the role that they can play in helping to address the problem?
Okay, so first of all, we don't have a conservation majority in our state legislative body. One thing we can do is actively get people out to vote for candidates who are conservation minded. That's one of our missions. We have a big election year coming up. We want to get those bad people out. We need to protect the House right now. The House is in danger. We're in danger of losing some major champions on the environment. We had to put our resources into making sure they stay in their seats and that we're getting people out to vote for those people. It's very important. And some of these are in, counties all over the state where it's hard to get people out to vote. That's one thing. We have very effectively started turning over seats, and we're becoming greener in the legislature. So we're doing better. I mean, we've turned over a lot of seats in just the past 9 years. So that's one part of it. I think the other part of it, does anyone know what happened in Moore County recently?
Yes, go
So I looked to Moore County, you know, this rural county that has suddenly become this powerhouse in the nation, right? The LA Times was calling Moore County commissioners, saying, what's going on over there? Can a little county like Moore County say there's not going to be any fracking or oil and gas development in our county? Yeah, the citizens can do that. Yeah, we can do it, right? So I see, you know, the power of the grassroots, the power of the people, the power of small counties and cities saying, we're not taking it. We're not going to do this anymore. And I'll tell you, once it hits the newspapers, our legislators start paying attention. I'll tell you, I can't tell you how many phone calls I get a day worried that we're going to go public with something that's going on. There's a lot of power to our media. So I think that